Hi everyone, I want to welcome you today to Royal Legal Solutions presentation about land trust, which is your first line of defense against lawsuits. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Scott Royal Smith, and I am the owner of Royal Legal Solutions, which is a modern law firm serving clients in all 50 states, especially for the real estate investor. I want to tell you a little bit today about land trust, because land trusts are the number one things that protect people from lawsuits. And if you don't know about land trusts, you're leaving yourself vulnerable. But there's some details and technical requirements about them that are going to be exceptionally important for you to learn today to be able to know if this is really the right type of strategy for you. So here's the first thing we need to talk about when we talk about trust. A lot of people don't understand trust. So if you understand trust, it puts you in the top 1% of the knowledge that you can have as a real estate investor. The first thing you need to understand about trust is that there's three different types. You have your revocable trust, you have irrevocable trusts, and then you also have statutorily created trusts. Your revocable trusts are as a type of trust that you, as the creator of a trust, you can just tear it up at any time, and then all of the assets just flow back to you as the creator of the trust. An irrevocable trust is a trust that once it's created, you can't terminate that trust. You can't change anything about it. It's locked in place. And then you have statutorily created trusts, which are trusts that are created by state statute. And those have particular requirements that you actually have to look at the state statutes to figure out exactly how do they work. Now, the types of trusts that we work with at Royal Legal Solutions spans the entire gamut. We look at revocable trusts for things like land trusts, where we want to create anonymity. We can change the beneficiaries of these trusts. They're very, very flexible at any given time. These types of revocable trusts can also be used as like living trusts, right? To be able to bypass probate court. It can keep all of your assets private, both from assets being passed through probate court as well as private on the public records, because these trusts can be used for anonymity purposes. And because these revocable trusts are being able to be changed, it makes it a really great estate planning tool, because you can modify the trust depending upon how you want your heirs or your children to be able to use those assets after you die, which may change during your lifetime about how you think that those assets should be used, and you can spell that and change that into your trust. Now, the second type of trust I want to tell you guys about is this irrevocable trust. This is commonly referred to as an asset protection trust. The terms of this trust can't be changed. The beneficiaries are fixed. The assets are locked inside of the trust. And it doesn't give you any flexibility. But what it does do is provide you some asset protection, because whereas a revocable trust without anything else attached to it, if a revocable trust is sued or you're sued, they can get to all of the assets that are held inside of a revocable trust. In an irrevocable trust, they're not able to do that, right? This is what we would refer to as like creditor protection, right? If somebody sues you, right, what they get is a judgment that actually turns them into what's called a judgment creditor to come after your assets. And if your assets are inside of an irrevocable trust, they can't touch those assets, right? Irrevocable trusts are also really great for having types of tax deductions, especially for your estate planning tax. It's a way to be able to help make sure that your estate is going to be under the estate planning tax thresholds. If you are a high net worth individual, this becomes really important. Irrevocable trust can also be kind of cool in states where LLCs might not be a great route for you, right? So I know a lot of clients that are in California as well as Florida, where the LLC laws are just really prohibitive, either by not providing enough protection or that they're just incredibly expensive. And in these cases, a lot of times an irrevocable trust can be used for the most basic level of protections. You'll also find irrevocable trust being used in Medicare planning, because in Medicare planning, the government will actually look at how many assets do you have when it comes time for you to be able to draw on any governmental benefits. If you have assets, they actually take your assets first and make you pay out of your own pocket until all of your assets are gone, and then you get the governmental benefits. But with proper use of irrevocable trusts and proper Medicare planning, using irrevocable trusts, what you're able to do is have the government pay all of your medical expenses from day one. The last type of trust I want to talk to you guys about here is what's called the statutorily created trust. This is the Delaware statutory trust that we use. Now, this is a type of trust that's created by statute. So if you want to know the details of the Delaware statutory trust, you can't go to common law, right, which is like the case law, which allows the creation for revocable and irrevocable trusts. You actually have to go to the state statutes, which is passed by the legislature. So what you're looking for there is you're looking for the codified laws. You're looking for what are the updates around those laws. And you're also wanting to know that the statutorily created trust can oftentimes have more functionality as well as better protections than your irrevocable trusts. And sometimes they have some really cool features like the Delaware statutory trust, where it can create child series like individual entities to compartmentalize every asset of your trust, which an irrevocable trust wouldn't be able to do. The Delaware statutory trust and statutorily created trust are usually very simple to create because they're spelled out. They just have to be make sure that they're created correctly. And they're also have special bankruptcy features as well as different types of internal regulations that you have to maintain to be able to be sure that your statutorily created trust is going to be treated as a trust for tax purposes and other purposes. So there's a lot of common myths that we see that are associated with trust, right? So we talked about revocable trusts and land trusts, right? And a lot of people say like, well, a land trust doesn't really make you anonymous, right? It just holds the asset anonymous and that they can find you in the chain of title. So that is not really all that great for you to move assets into a land trust. And the reality situation is that's just simply not true. There's huge benefits to making all the public records make everybody believe that your property is not owned by you and make them guess that you might own it or not. Another common thing that we say is that land trusts don't provide lawsuit protection. And that's true to the extent that if a revocable trust, like a land trust, is sued or somebody sues you, they can get to the assets of the land trust or the revocable trust. But we don't typically use land trusts for liability protection, right? What are we going to use for liability protection? We're going to use the second and third column here, in either an irrevocable trust or a statutorily created trust. We use this land trust to provide protection and keeping the lawsuit from getting filed in the first place, right? By creating that anonymity. A lot of people also think that they can't use trust because the mortgages are going to prevent them from using these type of trusts. And the reality is that the trusts actually have an exemption called an exclusion that prevents the due on sale clause from being triggered, called the St. Germain Act, so that you can feel confident in knowing that when you're using these trust structures that it's not going to put your property in jeopardy based upon the way a mortgage company or note holder might otherwise be able to accelerate your note based upon the due on sale clause of your mortgage. And some people even think that land trusts, for example, only are able to use raw land, and that's not true. Land trusts are a type of trust that's really a property trust, right? It's there to hold any type of property. It can hold a raw piece of land. It can hold a house. It can hold an apartment complex. It can hold the ownership of stock inside of a company. It can hold just about anything. So the top benefits that you can get from using these trusts is that it can own any asset you want anonymously. It can avoid the due on sale clause of your mortgages, so you can feel free to transfer properties into the trust that have indebtedness attached to them, like your real estate. So you can feel confident in knowing that you can obtain all of your financing and still use these trusts to protect you and to protect your assets, and that you can hold just about any type of asset in all 50 states, not just land. And because you use trust structures, you're able to create anonymity inside of the ownership. So this is how you stop lawsuits before they start. Now, if you need a land trust for your particular situation, there's a couple of things that you should consider. The first thing to consider is, how would a land trust fit inside of the bigger picture? It's really important that we always keep things settled from the 10,000 foot up view. So this is our freedom temple that you can see here on the side of your screen. You can see here at the top, it's wealth creation, which is first thing we got to do is we got to make money. The second thing we got to do is save money from taxes, and that's how we create the most amount of capital we can. Third thing we have to do is protect our assets to protect the money that we've made from lawsuits. Fourth is, how do we get our time back after we've been able to create some of this wealth? Fifth is, how do we get to the legacy planning, right? How do we get to being able to make sure that everything we've created gets passed on to the heirs and the people that we care about? And under the foundation of all of this is the better that we do with the temple, the foundations of our lives become better, which is our personal fulfillment. So you can see here in the 5 pillars of asset protection, we talk about liability and separation, isolation, insurance, and anonymity. Revocable trusts are trusts that are going to relate a lot of times to this anonymity portion. Then we looked about the liability and separation. That's when we're starting to think about irrevocable trusts and statutorily traded trusts that help protect us from the lawsuits themselves. And we can also see here that isolation and insurance are important pieces of the broader picture of what treats asset protection. And why it's important to keep this noted, guys, is because this is the fundamentals of how do you actually achieve financial freedom and claim your time, protect your assets, and build your legacy. This is the 10,000 foot up map, and trusts are an essential part of what you need to do if you want to be using the strategies that are available to you that typically were previously reserved, for those billionaire type classes. So you should be looking to get and use trusts if you have a single family home, you own raw land, you have syndication investments. If you have anything out there that you think that you want to keep privacy around, trusts are going to be your ideal way to do it. You don't need a trust if you don't have a single family home or any other property, that you don't have any investments, or if you're okay with everybody being able to know everything you own, and they can find that out from public records without using trusts to be able to increase your level of privacy. So you can really think about the real value of trust and the power of trust is like a lawsuit camouflage, because when it looks like on the public records that you don't own anything, what that means is people don't want to come after you and sue you, because listen, nobody sues somebody that looks like they qualify for food stamps, right? It's just not a good business decision to do so. So you can see here inside of the Freedom Temple, this is we've highlighted, this is the anonymity pillar of the Freedom Temple that a revocable trust would provide you with. So this lets you hold your assets anonymously, whether it's a single family home, your land, your notes, your syndication investments, whatever it might be. And the best part is, guys, with these types of revocable trusts, you don't have any disruption with the inside of the normal financing chains that you might otherwise have, right? So it really becomes a question of, if this is going to be the right type of strategy for you, really depends upon how committed are you to wanting that type of privacy and protection. So when we think about the hard assets and how we're going to treat hard assets in their relationship to trust, what we're looking for is a single trust per asset, right? And the reason why is because we don't want multiple assets tying to a single trust, because that people look to research that, they'd say, hey, that's the pot of gold that we should go after. It looks like that pot, if we sue it, has a lot of stuff in it. So we want to keep things divided up as much as possible. And we're able to do that because trusts like revocable trusts are being able to create it underneath the common law. So we can create these based upon templates that are attorney verified templates that are drafted for your particular situation, but they don't have the filing fees and other costs associated with them that would otherwise make it a cost prohibitive type of strategy. And when we use the trusts for our asset holding, we know that we're going to be able to get the typical type of financing that we're looking for. And for real estate investors, this is exceptionally important, especially when it comes to your first 10 properties, because you want to be closing on those properties in your personal name and to be able to get the conforming loans to get the best interest rates. But immediately after the closing, you want to transfer that into a land trust, right, which is the type of revocable trust, to be able to create the anonymity that we're looking for to stop the lawsuits before they ever start. Some people ask me about, say, hey, Scott, once all my stuff is held anonymously inside a trust, how am I ever going to qualify for financing? Because nothing is in my name anymore. It's all held by all these trusts. And, it doesn't expose me if I have to go to the bank and then be able to disclose the documentation to them to prove the ownership of the trust. That way they can know, like, hey, I'm actually the owner of this property. And what I tell people is, listen, the banks are going to care about what is the reality of the situation after you show them the documentation. They're going to say, okay, great, we actually really understand all these assets really belong to you, and those count toward you for financing. Over the last 5 years, we've had no problems with using the trust structure and being able to qualify for financing with assets held inside the trust structure. And furthermore, the disclosures to the banks of giving your bank documentation, well, that's all private information, right? That's just disclosed to the bank. That type of information isn't public. And what we're really concerned about when we're trying to produce the type of anonymity that stops lawsuits is what's publicly searchable, because it's based on that information that people actually file the lawsuits. So for hard assets, it's one trust per asset. So soft assets, these are assets that don't have individual liability attached to them. Hard assets are ones that have individual liability attached to them. So a hard asset is like a piece of real estate, because somebody can fall and get hurt on your piece of real estate. That means there's individual liability attached to real estate, because people can get hurt there and then sue the real estate and the real estate owner directly. Soft assets don't have that same type of problem, right? Syndication investments, loans, notes, etc. They don't have individual liability attached to them, but they're a great place to hold inside of your trusts as well, because a lot of times you might want to make that syndication investment or own that note through a trust. That way other people that are involved in that transaction don't know that you're the party that's directly involved in the investment, right? It's just an additional layer to say, hey, listen, I want that type of security and that information security from the outside world, and listen, it just makes me uncomfortable. This is like a really great place to own soft assets inside of the trust. Now, what's great about the trust, whether it's the revocable trust for owning a piece of real estate or to own a syndication investment or whatever the case may be, is that you can use something that's called a nominee trustee and relate to that trust, and that's a third party that signs on behalf of the trust for you. They don't get to control any part of the trust. You maintain all of the actual control of the trust as the client, but a nominee trustee is able to execute everything for you, to have a cutout between you and the other investment. So a lot of times the best thing you can do for this is actually use an attorney. So for my clients, I'm that nominee trustee. I'm signing many documents that for them as the nominee trustee, filing any state-related filings on behalf of any trusts for them. And so that way, for any of those transactions, it has to go through me, through a third party. I'm the one that signs everything, and all of the information related to this trust is all protected then by the attorney-client privilege, which is the very highest information security that you get. And at any time, the nominee trustee can be changed by the client without any intensive undertaking, right? It's very, very easy to change the nominee trustee as you like. Now, when we look at beyond the trust, right? Let's look at beyond the simple use of land trusts and talk about how we can use land trusts in conjunction with other types of asset protection to give us not only information protection, right, anonymity, but also be able to actually protect us from the lawsuits in case they ever get filed. And the way that we do that is we combine the trusts with LLCs to create this bulletproof type of defense. So you can see here inside of the Freedom Temple, the 5 pillars of asset protection show us that now we're talking about not just anonymity, which is the use of the anonymous trust, right, like a land trust, but also the liability protection, because that's the piece that the LLC gives us. And here what we're typically looking for is one trust per asset, and we're also typically looking at one limited liability company or one compartmentalized entity to provide the liability protection, as well as using the attorney-client privilege. So if you're owning an asset, a single asset inside of a land trust, you can own that asset anonymously inside of the trust, with the trustee being a nominee trustee, which is an attorney. That trust is in turn owned by an LLC, and that LLC then provides the liability protection. So if anybody looks into who owns this asset, right, they're going to see that it's owned by the name of a trust, and that's attached to an attorney. If they ever ask about any information regarding that trust, the attorney actually can't provide it to them legally because that information is protected by the attorney-client privilege. Now, if there's ever a lawsuit and people sue through the trust, what they find out is that trust is in turn owned by an LLC, so that way there's no liability that they can extend outside of that individual LLC. So the most you can ever lose from the lawsuit, if they ever filed it in the first place, is that single asset. Now, one of the great things that people typically don't know about to further increase their protection is how to have the LLC in turn owned by a trust. So in this scenario, there's actually two trusts in one LLC. You have one trust at the very top that owns the LLC, and then the LLC in turn owns the trust at the bottom, and the trust at the bottom in turn owns the asset. What this allows you to do is to be able to own your LLC anonymously, so people don't even know you own that company unless you tell them. And you get to own the asset anonymously through the land trust at the bottom. That trust at the top that owns the LLC, we call that an agent trust. So the agent trust can actually own any type of limited liability company, corporation, etc. And it can be is either listed as a member or a manager of that LLC. And that agent trust, just like the revocable land trust, is also structured underneath the principles of the common law, so that they're very easily created without any filing fees. And these trusts can own bank accounts if you want to, but in most cases, the actual banking and the bank account is actually held in the name of the LLC, because that's where the true liability protection is there. And when a lot of people are worried about, say, hey, is this going to take a lot of time, money, expense to maintain, and does it complicate my taxes? And the great news is it doesn't do any of that. You're able to monitor and do everything with one bank account, one EIN number, and one tax return. For the entire entity stack, like everything together. And the reason why is because revocable trusts and single member LLCs are treated for tax purposes as pass-through entities, so it all flows through to your personal tax return. And then for compliance purposes, the only entity that you really have to maintain year over year is the LLC. So the absolute amount of work and expense that you have to go into being able to have much better protections with the anonymity put in place actually doesn't cost you anything more than you would otherwise have with just a plain old LLC, right? Or just using an individual trust. So just to give you guys a little bit of the broader perspective of how this works if you have multiple properties and you're going to use a strategy where you're going to have multiple LLCs. It's like a typical tree structure that you might be used to. And very technical terms, what this type of structure with the LLCs is actually referred to as a hub and spoke model. So just taking this from the very top, you can see that the agent trust owns the LLC. That's how we're going to be able to own that hub LLC anonymously, because if anybody looks to say, hey, who owns this LLC, it's connected to that trust, that agent trust. That agent trust is further connected to the law firm as a person, and therefore it's protected by the attorney-client privilege. Now, looking a little bit farther down underneath the hub LLCs, you get to see each of the spoke LLCs. So here you can see that it's one spoke LLC, one land trust, and then one property. So that's spoke A, land trust A, and then property A underneath it. So this allows us to be able to protect each asset individually. So if there's ever a lawsuit against a property A, they can't go after property B, C, D, etc., because the lawsuit is compartmentalized to the individual LLC. So if they sued property A, they can only get to the assets that are held by the LLC spoke A, and that's only that single property. So, and if you're ever sued, they can't get to any of the assets, because you want to be like the rich people are, right? Really rich people, they don't own anything at all. Everything they own is actually inside of an entity structure that's anonymously held exactly like this. And just to blow your mind a little bit more about how much more expansive these strategies can get, we looked at everything on today's presentation is everything that's on the right-hand side of the screen, right, regarding the asset holding company. And there you can see the agent trust, the Wyoming LLC hub that's typically used here, as well as the individual LLC spokes, land trust, etc. You can also see how that attaches to a living trust as part of your estate planning underneath item 3 here. You might also notice here on the left-hand side that something we didn't cover today that you should stay tuned for in an upcoming presentation presentation, which is about the operating company and how you can further separate all of your active business operations from your asset holding company, how you can be using retirement accounts to be able to help shelter that income from taxes, and how all of that can roll up to your estate plan underneath your living trust. So that way, when you're done using these assets, that they go to the parties that you care about most, and how you might actually consider if your net worth is high enough, using offshore entities as your worst case scenario insurance, and you want to move the assets outside of the jurisdiction of the United States. So guys, let's go into the owner's manual of how to use the land trust effectively. So when you buy the property, you're always going to be buying the property in your personal name. You're going to be using a conforming loan to acquire that property. But when you transfer it into the land trust as a type of revocable trust, it avoids the due on sale clause, as long as that property that you buy is a 1 to 4 unit property, meaning 1 to 4 unit doors on a single property. Those are all inside of the exceptions for the Saint Germain Act. We're always going to be using a warranty deed to do this transfer, because that's going to allow you to preserve your title insurance. And you're going to be listed as the prior owner on the public record, but we're going to make that transfer look like a bona fide sale to a trust to investors. And if anybody happens to guess that, hey, maybe you really do still own that property, guess what? They're actually wrong, because the trust doesn't own anymore. I'm sorry, you don't own it anymore. Actually, the trust owns it, and the trust actually is owned by the LLC. So there's no concern there about somebody being able to guess and guess right, so to speak. Whenever you want to sell the property, there's a couple of different ways you can do it. You can either sell the property directly out of the trust to the buyer, or in some circumstances we've seen it where the title companies want you to transfer the property out of the trust to your personal name, and then from your personal name to the ultimate buyer. And then has to do with just from title company to title company, it can be a little bit different. But not to worry, it's very, very simple, and it's formulaic about how to coach the title companies to be able to move those properties and the way that we want them to in a very expeditious manner. That's a very time-tested type of solution for us. Also, with using the trusts and the LLCs, you don't lose any of your tax advantages. So you can still do 1031 exchanges and everything that you would normally do that's going to be able to help keep your ROI high, right? ROI is the name of the game, and we understand that. Great. So let's talk about refinancing. So it's going to be really difficult to refinance anything with the best possible loan terms inside of an LLC or a trust, because those are going to be outside of the cookie cutter norms that have the best rates with them. So really the best thing to do for refinancing when you're using trusts and LLCs is to leave all of your existing infrastructure in place, right? Deed the property into your personal name, conduct the refinance, and then deed it back into the land trust. And you can do that cycle. It's very inexpensive to do that because most of all the work has already been done on the front end from having that property initially inside of the trust. This is going to allow you to be able to use your conforming loans that you would want to be able to get your best interest rates. And it's very cost effective to compose the two deeds that are needed to be able to conduct that transfer. One quick tip into that, though, is that you do want to use a little bit of foresight and when you're going to be doing your refinancing, because what we've seen is that in some situations, the banks want to have the property held for 6 months to have the proper seasoning. So what we always recommend is to have a brief conversation about your strategy when we're looking to actually put together the infrastructure. And when we're talking about strategy here, we're talking about your financial strategy, so we can make sure that the legal structures that we want to use and the tax structures we want to do actually will align with the strategic moves you're going to be making on terms of maximizing your ROI for your business plan. So among our frequently asked questions here, number one is about how do the taxes work. And the great thing is how the taxes work for revocable trusts is that it's completely pass through. Irrevocable trusts oftentimes will require a separate tax return and EIN number for the irrevocable trust. And the DST can either be treated as its own entity and file a trust tax return, or you can treat it as a pass-through entity and have all of the income pushed to your personal return. If you're using an LLC in conjunction with the land trust, just pretend about the fact that the land trust itself, for tax purposes, it's as if it doesn't exist if it's a revocable trust. Otherwise, treat it as its own separate entity. So if you have a revocable trust that's owned by an LLC, and that LLC is single member, like we talked about earlier, that is a disregarded entity. Both of them are. And so then all that income flows to your personal tax return. If you have a revocable trust that's owned by an LLC and that LLC has two members, well, now it's a partnership return because it's as if the revocable trust didn't exist. Then it would be two partners of an LLC and they're required to file a partnership return in that case. Does that make sense? So when you want to look at item number 3 here on our FAQ is, should you use insurance with a land trust? And the answer is yes. And all you have to do is contact your insurance carrier and add the land trust to your existing insurance policy as an additional insured, right? Which is usually about a 10-minute call to your insurance agent. And it's very, very simple. And a lot of people ask me, how much does it cost to set up one of these land trusts and get my assets into it? And it's typically around $300 to $550 per asset, depending upon what we need to do, right? If it's the formation of the trust, what type of transfer documentation is required, do we need to do a deed for the piece of real estate? But we're going to be able to get into that in specifics on the call. But just to know that we've worked with every single type of asset. So if you're looking for anonymity, no matter what that asset is, we're going to be able to handle that for you and have experience with that land trust. All right, guys, really appreciate your time and attention today. The best thing to do if you're interested inside of land trust is to be in or irrevocable trust or the Delaware statutory trust is to go to royallegalsolutions.com and take the quiz. With that quiz, you're going to be able to make contact and have a productive conversation with our staff on the very first phone call. So thank you so much for providing that information to us, because that allows us to be able to really show you our best side, which is giving you all the information we possibly can up front so you can make an informed decision on who do you want to partner with and who's going to be able to help you get to financial freedom in the best way. So thank you so much. Again, my name is Scott Royal Smith. I'm the CEO of Royal Legal Solutions, and I look forward to partnering in business with you.